Welcome to today's episode of The Growth Zone. I am Christian Bartsch. What is the core benefit of listening to this show? Business leaders in corporate and privately held companies gain insights into trends and strategies that provide them with a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Each episode focuses on an area such as marketing, sales, innovation, or funding that is absolutely critical to the growth of companies, whether they are startups or corporate global players, where management needs to juggle the challenges of market entry or knowing how to navigate the uncertainties of disruptive developments. Mind feeding is where clarity evolves and helps solving organizational challenges. For those who listen to the entire episode, I have a special surprise gift. I am working on some great guests that are industry leaders in management, innovation, and marketing. Let's get started on today's episode. Today I'm with Asa Hochhauser, and we're going to talk about following topic: how tech startups rapidly grow their B2B sales. Asa, before we get started, can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. First off, Christian, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I've been in B2B sales for about 16 years now, and most of my focus has been in the marketing technology and sales technology space. So I've worked at several SaaS startups, helping them grow their sales functions, one being Ion Interactive, that was founded by Scott Brinker, Anna Tellerico and Justin Tellerico, some SaaS pioneers, and Scott is a MarTech, thought leader. So got to cut my teeth there, and just have been in and around marketing technology for quite a while since then. Was a head of sales at a company called Linux Academy that does cloud training, and eventually sold to a company called A Cloud Guru, and is now owned by a company called Pluralsight. From there, I'm now a VP of sales at Maga.io. Maga.io is a marketing technology and analytics consultancy. And we help companies choose the right marketing technologies, implement and integrate those technologies, and then execute growth strategies across the sales and marketing organizations.
Great. So, how can tech startups rapidly grow their B2B sales?
Yeah, that's a pretty open question. There's a lot of directions that you could take. I think one thing that, for the purpose of where I'm spending a lot of time talking to my clients is like, how do you know when to implement technology to rapidly grow? And that's a lot of times companies are putting in technology or certain processes before, or even putting salespeople on the phone before they're actually ready for it. So one thing that I definitely always think companies need to take some time to think about is really thinking about like, what are the goals that the company is looking to achieve first and foremost, and then start to understand how can they achieve those goals, and understand that, a lot of times that is going to come back to understanding your buyer, right? And who you're selling to, and how do you do that effectively. If you don't have a really good understanding of that, and if your sales team doesn't have a really good understanding of the ins and outs of your buyer's day to day and the problems that they're facing, you're going to have a really tough time, selling to them and growing the organization. So as a CEO or founder, and you have a product that you're bringing to market, likely you've identified a gap there. But I definitely think the rest of the people within your organization need to understand that as well, so that you can then figure out how to accelerate processes that work well at starting those types of conversations. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
exactly. Yeah, that makes sense, especially when you think of it. Every client is different, but of course, if you maybe are focused on a niche or something, then maybe it's easier to focus on one type of business or so, or one industry or that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And even when you think about the business, like we would consider that your ideal company profile, right? Your ICP, identifying what businesses are really successful in using your software service. And then when you think about who is actually going to be engaging with your team on a personal level, that's where you start to get into that persona conversation, right? So, and when I talk about the day to day, the ins and outs, if you're selling to a head of marketing, right, what do they care most about, and what are they challenged with? A head of marketing is going to be really focused on results and making sure their team is successful and things that are important to an executive, whereas someone like a marketing manager might be a little bit more focused on like, how do I get this landing page created, right? And so making sure that you have a messaging and understanding the problems that are associated with each of those folks, so that you can start to serve them both appropriately, both from a software and services perspective, but also you can get their attention by with effective messaging and outreach.
Yeah, and that comes to outreach, of course, when you think of it B2B, different companies, different approaches, different industries, different habits. When you think of it, maybe the buyer, who is the buyer? Is it the boss? Is it the CEO? Or is it the IT guy? Depends maybe on the product as well, who you're wanting to address to.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think, like, how do you start to identify that, right? A lot of times companies, they start to sell, right? And they get their first few sales, and they're just happy that they get sales and it just carries on. But they don't create a mechanism to start to understand who their buyer is and who is consuming their content or their product. So one thing that I often I see companies do is they think about operations and creating the mechanism to be able to capture data about their buyer too late. And so when they want to start to accelerate, they wish that they had these insights that can help them do so, but they never set up the infrastructure to be able to do that. So when you're trying to understand who's actually buying your product, I think making sure that you have a way to understand who is buying and who is successful using your product early on is super important. Whether that's just doing interviews yourself, whether that's setting up a CRM and being able to capture that data in some way, and surfacing it so it's usable, I think is whatever that might be. You have to start somewhere and making sure that you're capturing that information.
Okay, and then how would they then actually go then further on to really put extra power into the tube?
Yeah, I think that's where that's hopefully the value of technology often is that they start to understand certain things. Then you can start to use technology to accelerate those things. So if you start to know, that, hey, everyone that buys our stuff is we'll just keep running with the head of marketing at a software company between 10 and 50 million in revenue. It's a pretty small sample size, but we'll just run with it. Then you could do things like, all right, so how do we go and get more of these folks into our world? And that it could be from a content marketing standpoint. Where do they understanding where these people are hanging out online or offline, and or maybe it's from a data provider, like how do we get more data on from additional people that look like our best customer, and starting to plug in things to help with that. And one thing that is really interesting that I've seen also help is just really staying in tune with the conversations that you are having. Capturing the notes and the conversations, whether that's via recording or transcription services. I find those types of things are really easy lift to continue gaining intelligence about your buyer, and can be used for training and sales enablement. As you're having conversations, and understanding how people are reacting to certain things and how your team is, handling certain situations. You can start to scale that across the organization. So once you start to gain the knowledge and the data points, and you can start to make some smart decisions, then you can start to think about how you could scale those things, but always making sure that you're considering a few things, right? One, that anything that you want to scale, does it truly map back to what your goals of an organization are? Also, do you have the internal bandwidth to be able to manage anything that you do want to accelerate based on the data that you're capturing? And then also, like, how does anything that you are going to scale integrate across the organization? A lot of times, these acceleration methods are done in a bubble. And not thought about how they can positively or negatively impact other departments and teams. So thinking about how this is going to integrate, throughout the organization is super important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, think of it as well. Of course, you've got your first clients and you've already increasing the sales and that. But that's of course a way to maybe increase as well what the customers are maybe buying. It's depends very much on whether you're from maybe introducing new features or whether you are adding maybe complementary products or services. Let's say, for instance, you do some kind of cooperation with some startup that's maybe in the same building and has something that would perfectly fit with your product together as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the people who are making those decisions often don't talk to marketing and sales, right? Who are at the front lines. Everyone's always kind of so busy doing their own thing. And I see that the fastest growing organizations are the ones that are able to work together cross departmentally and really attach like product development to what they're seeing on the marketing and sales side, and vice versa. If you can really close that loop, throughout the organization, which is easier said than done, then you'll be far ahead a lot of your competitors.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense, because then of course you have a chance as well to maybe be the first one to offer something that maybe is even the best fit. And even if somebody else decides to offer to the same person, they might decide, well, okay, we've seen an alternative, but the first one is still the best.
Yep.
And then they'll buy it. Yeah. And so, of course, now and then startups, of course, realize they might think to add something. What do you think are the biggest threats to growing sales if they start adding stuff that maybe is not appropriate to what the client wants?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is accelerating just bad practices. If you just think about maybe like an outreach tool, like the sales engagement platforms are becoming very, very popular, as a way to automate outreach. If you automate, bad messaging that doesn't resonate with your buyer, is too product centric, or it doesn't really show that you know them, that's just going to, put a bad taste in their mouth and do a lot more damage than good in a lot of ways. So that's why a big thing I talk about is like sales education before sales technology, right? So how do you make sure that your teams are well aware of the buyer and what they truly care about, and how they like to receive content, and how they like to engage, when they're buying things, and then mapping to that, rather than doing the other way around. You can really damage your reputation if you don't take the time to really think about that. We hear time and time again, it's a buyer's world out there. They're in control now. Gone are the days where sales, is in control of the buying process. So we have to understand, them, and then adjust to that and accelerate that to give them, a greater customer experience across the board, based on those learnings.
Yeah, and how do you see when you think, of course, some startups will engage into, let's say, traditional sales, field sales, and others might be using cold calling, use social selling, all these different kinds of let's say, strategies, tactics, and so on that are from like 50, 100 years old, and to tactics that are nowadays quite applicant to what's been introduced in many companies due to the pandemic. Where do you see the benefits and disadvantages of using the different kind of techniques to grow?
Yeah, so I think you just have to find what works for you. Always testing new things. You never want to be one of my favorite lines that I learned throughout my sales career is, if you single thread, you're dead. So making sure that you're always trying different things and different ways to engage with your buyer. And so, I think some industries, are still very friendly on the phone. Some companies, don't even, they don't even have a phone, and people don't want to get a call on their cell phone until they know you. So, you just have to be cognizant of that. But yeah, times are definitely changing. Digital is becoming more and more, prevalent. It's been around for, a while now, but it's, accelerated with the pandemic. And I think, things like you're doing with your podcast and different ways to kind of make sure that you're adding value, are going to become more and more important, in creating demand strategies, kind of, flooding the market, your relevant market with your knowledge is always, I think, going to be one of the best ways to kind of get people to come to you, and start to build an audience there that you can easily engage with.
Yes, exactly. Because then, of course, they know you, they trust you, and well, at least they know that they are talking to somebody who obviously knows what they're talking about, and not somebody who just was selling carpets yesterday and today is selling, let's say, cars, and tomorrow he'll be selling cinema tickets or whatever, or
Yeah.
real estate or whatever, and he hasn't got a clue what he's doing actually. And if you actually do engage in business with that person, it'll be just a nightmare because stuff isn't done that should be done. Even in SaaS, you can do so much damage in a business. Even if the client is a small company, you can practically bust it out of the sky, and the same thing applies for a big company. The whole system can get choked, and suddenly comes another big company and eats them up. Merge and acquisition, which can get very nasty, or if worse, both get a bad hiccup, and then both big companies then actually fall apart because it was obviously too big to swallow and too messed up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good point, and even when you think about startups, right? They have, when you're creating a new market, a lot of times, like when I worked at Ion Interactive, we were selling, back then it was pretty transformative software for creating landing pages, microsites, and interactive content, without needing a developer or a web designer, right? And we were fairly new company, so you're usually going to hire salespeople that really don't have a ton of experience. So that's why I always put the emphasis back on sales education and making sure that you can train them on who your buyer is. As a leader within an organization, you should be the one that kind of holds that knowledge. So making sure that you're creating an environment where new sellers can become experts fairly quickly as far as who their buyers and the problems that they're facing. Some of the things that also can be taught, early on, so that you can avoid these disasters, as you are scaling up an early stage startup, is making sure that they understand not just the problems that your software or service solves, but also what does it look like from an implementation standpoint. A lot of times companies don't think about that. And if a seller can come in and add value there and have them ask them questions that are going to make them think about, all right, let's think about after you've purchased this, what does that look like? What is the end result? What is the goal? What is the success going to look like, in 6, 12, 18 months from now? If you could start to have those conversations and train your team how to have those conversations early on, just based on the knowledge of your buyer and the problem that you're solving, and then having a solid level of business acumen, then you can really avoid some of those tragedies of you often see in making technology decisions, or like you said, purchasing a company that you didn't really understand what they did.
Exactly. And that otherwise, of course, messes up not only your balance sheet, but the whole entire business, and creates chaos as well among employees and so on. And that's the thing. Even you sometimes even see small startups eating up big startups, or vice versa, which can be quite a disruption as well, of course, on the market. On the other hand, of course, what does a B2B client usually, let's say, use as criteria to decide whether they buy from that startup? What do you think are the key criteria, especially when you look at it from marketing side and so on, how they perceive the startup to be?
So could you just repeat the question, just so I make sure I understand?
Yeah. So when we look at from the perspective of a business who's buying services from a startup, whether it's a SaaS product or any kind of a product, usually a company evaluates, of course, the offering based on what the product does and so on. But there's as well a second aspect that they usually look at. It doesn't matter whether it's a small company who's buying something or it's a big company who's buying something. Of course, for the one guy, he's spending the money from his company, and the other guy is maybe spending money that actually belongs to his employer, and he of course wants to grow in his own career, but he doesn't want to mess up his career by spending money on something that eventually everybody going to say that was the stupidest idea to buy this kind of stuff, because it either doesn't work, or the worst thing, of course, that everybody fears: buy something, you implement it, install it, run it, and suddenly the company goes bust and the startup is gone. Your data is as well gone. Like yesterday, when you think of it, this so-called startup Facebook, and their whole thing was gone. 6 hours.
That was crazy.
People who relied on WhatsApp messages to contact the clients, they couldn't do anything. It's not just consumers sending messages. Oh, here, I've got my new, I just bought myself a new jacket, or other kind of silly stuff. And companies who advertise on Facebook to generate revenue, 6 hours no ads means 6 hours no opportunity to get clients, new leads, and so on. And it's actually quite interesting when you think of it. Even big startups, Facebook is not really a startup anymore, but it's still volatile as any other company, whether it's small or big.
Yeah, whoever was responsible for that one had a bad day. That's for sure.
Exactly, and these are the things where companies, when they evaluate to buy a product from somebody, they decide, okay, is this thing going to do what we want, and is this company actually still going to exist in 2, 3, 4 years? Because it depends on the price, whether you're paying let's say a monthly fee. You might still have to spend money on consulting, other stuff. You have to get all your, let's say, old style stuff, data and so on, into this new system. Whether you're buying an ERP system, the cloud, marketing system, any kind of thing. It's not just buying this stuff and paying for the service. You have to feed it with something. You have to spend money to pay somebody to go and enter the data, import or adjust the thing. Even if you go and hire some consultant outside to configure your marketing system or whatever, whatever product, whether it's Salesforce, Infusionsoft, and other kind of products, you don't usually have the know-how inside. So you have to even spend for that money. And it would be a waste of money and a frustration when you've got everything ready and suddenly the startup goes bust or something else
Yeah.
happens, whatever. And you don't always know where's the startup actually based. It's not always obvious with every
Yeah,
business.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you have to be, you have to like, you don't want to, we don't want to set up $1 million a year tech stack for, for a small company, right? So you got to be really focused on making sure you're choosing the right tools based on your stage, the stage your company is in, right? So that obviously is budgets, right? But really, like what are always starting with the goals and then mapping back to that. Like what is the ultimate goal that you're looking to achieve by implementing any kind of tech or any kind of strategy within your organization, and doing a little bit of a risk mitigation, thought process as well. There's big platforms out there, monolith platforms, and then you could also, you could create pretty powerful stacks in a very cost effective manner by doing integrations, using tools like a Zapier, and kind of stitching integrations together as well is pretty cost effective. So, I think a couple things to think about when you are looking at a tool is, one, always make sure that that you're looking at are going to map back to your goals. And if it is a longer term play, then make sure that you have a long term plan, to map to that. And you're not gonna break the company by doing so. You have to think about integrations as well. How does it integrate not only across your other tools that you're using, but also across other departments and people? How does it impact those things downstream? We've seen that, time and time again. These are things that are afterthoughts and just create a lot of headaches and missed opportunities. And I liked your point too, Christian, about street cred of the actual technology. Like, we only recommend technologies at Maga.io that have been around for a while, have a strong customer base, and have proven success. Because there's so much volatility in the tech space, we want to make sure that we are recommending tools that are going to be here tomorrow. So that's an important piece as well. I think that maybe isn't thought about often.
Absolutely. And when you think of it, so many businesses just go out of business without any warning. This can always happen. Or even regulatory things happening, other kind of stuff. One company goes bust and then pulls out several other companies out, or like the VC goes bust, and then of course all the startups that maybe are dependent on cash from them, they go as well out of business. And that's of course certain risks you can't always mitigate. You can't even foresee everything what happens in the market. But nevertheless, yeah, it's interesting to hear as well your perspective on how to get startups to grow their sales as well rapidly. In general, there's often very much of a focus on consumer sales, but the B2B sales world has a lot of opportunity, since not every company sells products to consumers. Some are focused purely on business clients, and that's of course as well something to
And
focus
the
on. And
B2B world
yeah,
has taken a lot of best practices from the consumer side, because we're all humans just buying things, right? So
yeah,
whether it's for your business or for your home, there's a lot of this shared experience, experiences there, and just things that each industry can borrow from each other. So it really is an interesting time to be in marketing and sales, because there is this the buyer behavior just continue in the way people purchase, whether it's for their business or home, is continually evolving, and a lot of best practices from both can be used.
yeah, especially when everybody was more or less confined to the home office. They had to suddenly stop thinking, oh, I must get into my car or my plane or whatever and go and visit my client. It's a no-go. No way. And you're
Right.
like, okay, how do I do this? There's so many, even big companies had to suddenly learn how to not only do like stuff like social selling, but as well social marketing, but actually as well how to have a remote conversation, whether it's on the phone or on a Zoom or that kind of stuff. And not everybody is comfortable with that. So it's sometimes not quite easy for them.
Well, something that was interesting too is like just going back to even the top of our conversation, like focusing on the buyer. What we're hearing a lot, and the conversations we're having with executives is like, how do we just get better at doing the right thing, focusing on the right type of customer and expanding the relationship there. So it's interesting how, in a time of crisis, it will really, it forces you to take a step back and eliminate the waste and focus on where the most value and opportunity lie, because you don't have a ton there, right? You have to kind of be really strategic and about where you're going to focus your time when you got something like, the economic environment, dictating, your business decisions. You're going to be a lot smarter about that. Whereas I think there was pre-pandemic, there might have been, I think companies might have been a little bit wasteful in some of the activities that they were doing. So using data, like we've been talking to a lot of customers thinking about how do we use data to really refine who our customer is, and then be really smart about going after that particular customer and making sure that we are bringing on the right customers 100% of the time and not just some of the time.
Exactly, because otherwise it makes no sense if you try to sell to everybody. You'll always have somebody who's been unhappy because the product doesn't solve their problems and might even be so overcomplicated for the kind of business that they just can't handle it. Whatever you give them, what kind of tools or strategies or anything, they just can't use it properly, and then it just becomes negative and just, let's say, it burns as well your energy and doesn't get you anywhere closer to greater success in business.
Yep. And this has been a problem for a while, and I like when people ask me about the future of the tech world, like tech stacks and things like that, I think my answer is like, we've been burned enough now. I think people are actually going to start to learn from our lessons, and we're going to fulfill some of the promises that, were laid out to us, 5-10 years ago. So the future is that we start to get it right.
Exactly. So it was great having you here on the show, Asa. And if people want to connect with you and find out more what you do, how maybe get into a conversation or so, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the best place. That's where I'm most active. So anyone can reach out to me there.
Yeah, that's great. Then I'll add as well into the description as well of this episode as well, the link to your LinkedIn profile, and everybody can connect and have a great conversation.
And we have I'd love to point people to the Maga.io website as well. There's a lot of free tools there to help you manage your technology evaluations and your current tech stack. So a lot of really good tools there that you can use for free.
That's great. I'll add it as well to the links.
Cool.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Growth Zone with Christian Bartsch. Thank you for listening. Please leave a review or rating here on iTunes or on podchaser.com. If you found the content helpful, then share it on social media. I would like to invite you to follow our show so that you don't miss the upcoming interviews with leaders in the market. Simply visit the website follow.prmediareach.com. I will be adding the link also to the description of this episode so that you just need to click on that link. For those of you who are listening and signing up to follow the show, I have reserved a free copy of the Ultimate Guide on Content Marketing. This is the strategy that got me top corporate clients like McDonald's, Linde, Hewlett-Packard, Deutsche Bank, Volvo, and many others. That strategy has been working for over 10 years. It also got me contacts with police, transport authorities, military, and several universities, and even leading research institutes. For sure, it also worked wonders as it got me many small, medium-sized entrepreneurs and enterprises as clients. And that even included international clients from all around the world. The link to sign up for our free broadcasting service and the guide is follow.prmediareach.com. That will give you access to the most recent version of my ultimate guide on content marketing. You can follow me as well on Twitter by using the Twitter handle CAP Bartsch. That's spelled Charlie, Alpha, Papa, Bravo, Alpha, Romeo, Tango, Sierra, Charlie, Hotel. Yes, that is CAP Bartsch. Charlie, Alpha, Papa, Bravo, Alpha, Romeo, Tango, Sierra, Charlie, Hotel.